And I'd like you all to welcome to the stage Jeannie Allen from the Center for Education Reform.
Thank you, Jimmy, very much. Welcome, everyone, to everyone watching through the web and live stream. Hello, and welcome to rainy North Carolina, where everything is either stopped or slowed down as a result of the weather. It is not stopping or slowing us down, however. Expanding opportunity through education on the way to upward mobility is probably the most critical thing we can be thinking about, talking about, and advancing today. And so in the next couple of hours, you're going to hear from and talk with, I hope, and work with us to create an amazing national blueprint for unprecedented national, state, and local coordination. There's nothing more important than learning how not just to empower and provide the opportunity innovation that our kids and students across the country so sorely need, but making sure our policymakers who are busy every day have our ideas and we have theirs about how to actually help them do their jobs. We're often quarterbacking. Jimmy comes from a great football family. I rarely use these analogies, but we're often quarterbacking our policymakers. And we've had the pleasure at the center, and Jimmy does as well, in working with people across the country, and we find out when we actually stop and talk to them that they've got a lot more challenges than we ever dreamed and that they need our input. And so we're grateful to Congressman Messer, Governor McCrory, who'll be joining us shortly, the state representatives and local leaders for being here. So I'll see you all in a little bit. I'm going to turn it over to Jimmy as we welcome up Congressman Messer, Rob Bryan from the wonderful state of North Carolina.
And Travis Mitchell.
Thank you for being here. And Travis Mitchell, Communities and Schools.
Thank you. And you can sit right here.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, you get mic'd right there, and this is fine. You guys are good right where you're standing.
Great.
So this panel is called Can Washington Springboard Upward Mobility? And at a time when I think it's safe to say that voters in the country disdain what's happening in Washington. We're really privileged to have you, Congressman Messer, here with us, a representative from Indiana. Congressman Messer was in the TFA program, Teach for America, for 2 years in Los Angeles, which was the hometown of my father. And just a quick word on education and my dad. At the Jack Kemp Foundation, we focus on 3 policy areas for our Kemp Forum programs: equality of opportunity, economic policy, and foreign policy. And on equality of opportunity, the bottom line is that there are people who are getting unequal education with the dollars that are coming from government. And so Congressman Messer's experience in LA, where my dad went to Fairfax High School and then went to Occidental College and met my mom, Joanne, who's from a tiny town called Fillmore, and they both had a great education growing up in the 40s and being in college in the 50s. I'm really interested to hear about Congressman Messer's experience at Teach for America, and look forward to hearing from him. We're really pleased to have State Representative Rob Bryan with us. I found out that Representative Bryan is a parent of 6 children, ages, what'd you say, 16 to 5?
To 7.
16 to 7. I have 4 boys. My wife and I have 4 boys, ages 17 to 9. And we're living education on a daily basis. And being engaged in our children's education is critical. And certainly thinking about these issues from a parent's perspective is important. And Travis Mitchell, who went to college at Morgan State in Maryland, in Baltimore, and is with Communities and Schools, focusing on reducing the dropout rate in our public school system. And I'm looking forward to the conversation between Congressman Messer, who has, we're going to talk about some legislation that he proposed when he was a state rep in Indiana that increased the dropout age in Indiana from 16 to 18 and the impact that had. We want to talk about innovation and opportunity, and this is really a great, It wasn't Messer who was TFA.
I was going to correct you. Yeah, I was going to correct you later.
I wanted to hear his experiences, though, so I was looking forward to it.
Yeah, I wanted to hear that too. Forgive me. So this is going to be a free-ranging conversation, and I appreciate you all joining us. And, before I ask the first question, I'd like you all to just say hello to the audience and share any opening thoughts that you have. And Congressman Messer, we'll start with you.
Well, my experience in education includes being the head of something called School Choice Indiana, which was part of bringing sweeping education reform changes to Indiana that now have 200,000 kids in our state involved in various educational opportunities, between direct private school options to public school choice to homeschooling to the like. And then as Indiana's opportunities have expanded for kids, our graduation rates have soared as well, going from 70% to about 89% as a state over the last 10 years. So excited to talk about that, because ultimately this is the foundation of the American dream, making sure every kid in America has a chance to go to a great school. I think this forum is an important one in helping debate and discuss how we can better do that as a nation.
Right. Representative Bryan?
Well, glad to be here as well. And, my mom was an educator growing up. My sister also taught, she was actually a math teacher, which I wish she was, many of us out here wish she was still teaching right here in North Carolina. And so for me, education has been a part of, my life growing up. It was a great experience for me to go straight from, and I was a public school product right here in Wake County, adjacent, and went off to Chapel Hill and then went and did Teach for America for 2 years in Los Angeles. And so ended up going to law school and practicing law, but it's been great as a legislator to get really back involved in the education mix. And I'll make one more comment since I see Jeannie over there. In my Teach for America 2 years, you got a summer between, and I was Jeannie's first ever intern at the Center for Education Reform. My summer, and so
You survived to talk about it.
I survived to talk about it.
That's great. Mr. Mitchell?
Well, I come to this space after graduating from Wake County Public Schools also, and spending 20 years in media. And the founder of Communities in Schools, Bill Milliken, has a theory of change that programs don't change students, relationships do. And the more I do this work, the more I think about my 5th grade teacher, Cynthia Sanders, who taught me that I had a responsibility to lead and influence others. I think about my Little League coach, Herman Hinton, who told me that after the ball stops bouncing, what are you doing with what the Lord blessed you with between your ears? And so a lot of times when we engage in work about education and reform, we do it through various policies. We look at statistics. But for me, I think about the people. Because if we ever remove the intimacy out of education and don't realize that we have to get this down to an individual level, we'll never effect the change that we hope for. So I'm excited to be here to engage in a dialogue and a discussion that I think will help set the standards or set the table for the nation to follow.
Right. So my dad had a great influence on me, but my mom has had an even, in many ways more powerful influence on me. And she always talks about the power of the personal. So I think it's a critical component. And I think we all agree with you. I don't know if anybody would jump and say, what are you talking about? It doesn't matter. I mean, the power of a teacher and engagement, that's the name of the game. And so while if we can all recognize that and acknowledge that point, here's a really macro question that I want to open up with to Congressman Messer. Understanding that and other principles that we hold about what successful education means, can you talk about your philosophy of government's role in education? And obviously there's a lot of, you can take this in a lot of directions. Don't go too long like my father may, but
I loved your father. He could put on some stem liners though too. Yeah.
So you talk about your philosophy of government's role in education. And
I think it starts with this, and you allude to it in your opening remarks, Jimmy. you read the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, it says that we're all endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, rights that can't be taken from us. Among those is the right to pursue happiness. In modern life, we've kind of taken that to mean access to the American dream, right? The idea, as you articulated, that no matter where you grew up, no matter who your parents were, no matter what zip code, that you're entitled to a chance at success. And in modern life, to have access to that kind of opportunity, it all starts with access to a high-quality education. And I believe we have a moral responsibility as a nation to make sure that every kid in America has access to a high-quality opportunity. And by any fair measure today, we're falling short of that. Many kids have access to great schools. I'm a product of public schools. I'm actually a product of the Greensburg Community High School, small, relatively small, 10, 11,000 person town public school. But we have a moral obligation to make sure every kid has that opportunity. We also have a practical responsibility. When you look at an economy today where paychecks have frozen over the last 40 years, and the real gateway to opportunity and success is education. That, frankly, the opportunities in this economy, if you have a college education, are tremendous. If you don't, they're not. And so Gerard Robinson, a good friend of mine, has made the point that it's not only we have a moral obligation, but we actually have the practical reality that we need to do a better job. Now, I know part of our discussion today is, will Washington open those gateways of opportunities for folks? And I have to admit to you that I don't think the answers to these educational challenges are going to be found in Washington. Our responsibility in Washington is to first, of course, stay out of the way and try to figure out what we can do to empower parents and teachers and superintendents and principals and at the ground level to provide opportunities for kids. But it all starts with a recognition that we have a moral responsibility of providing that opportunity for every kid.
Just to follow up there, this is an open question. Is education an entitlement? We hear a lot about the entitlement state. And raising 4 boys, my wife and I, we're struck at the culture that seems to have infected our 17-year-old with an attitude of, hey, I get a car, I'm 16, where's my car? No, you don't get a car. You got to earn it. You got to work. There's an entitlement that I think all of us are concerned about in our society, and we know that our deficit, our numbers don't add up.
Yeah.
And so, can you just talk a little bit about whether or not it's an entitlement and how?
Well, I would suggest that even in the presidential campaign, on both sides of the aisle, by the way, you've had that tone and tenor that's a big part of the campaign. From my reading of the second paragraph of the Declaration, it says you are entitled to pursue happiness, right? In other words, it doesn't say you're entitled to be happy or that we have a responsibility to purchase your happiness. We have a responsibility, and a God-given right to an avenue of pursuing that. And to me, part of where we're failing for kids across America is, depending on your zip code in America today, you may not meaningfully have access to that kind of opportunity. And that's where we're falling short as a society. To me, the best way to make sure every kid has an opportunity of success is to empower parents. That's why I'm a big believer in school choice options. We spend $300+ billion a year as a society in America. We don't necessarily spend all that money well. No. And if we could make sure that every parent and therefore every child has access to that kind of opportunity, then, as you said, they still haven't. They have a responsibility to seize it. But I think by any fair measure today, we're falling short of that.
Yeah. Mr. Mitchell, on the issue of zip codes and your experience with public schools, and give us some background on your actual work with community schools, what you do day to day, but then go ahead and answer your philosophy of what government's role should be in education to accomplish kind of that personal touch that we know is needed for success.
Well, I think one of the things that the government can help, Washington can help us do is we've got to remove the barriers and the restrictions that strip innovation out of our schools. So parents need choice of schools, but they also need options within the schools. Mm-hmm. Therefore, the schools also need to be given the autonomy to come up with innovative strategies. Now, I believe that any innovation, there's an accountability that goes along with it. Did it work? There needs to be measurement. But I think we have to move, going back toward the individual level, we've got to stop comparing Jimmy and Sue. And we've got to begin to see, is Jimmy progressing at the growth rate that Jimmy can progress at? Is he fulfilling his potential? And if we get concerned with growth and individual growth, and we make a commitment as a nation to get our children to achieve the type of growth they can achieve, then you have schools that are not now comparing themselves against each other. They're really determining what they can do with the assets they have inside. So our vision statement at Communities and Schools of Wake County is that we help schools remove the barriers that put students at risk of wasting their potential, and we do it in two ways. One is we have graduation coaches in grades K through 12 that work with the students to make sure that they're on the positive track for post-secondary success. And then the second area is that we believe in academic enrichment. We believe in using project-based learning. Students have to make something. They have to engage during expanded learning hours. We use interactive instruction that helps give us a personalized learning plan to close gaps and put kids on an accelerated pace. And then we do small group instruction and real world application. Now here's where it gets interesting. I have a mentee and he's having a hard time. I've been mentoring him for 3 years. Out of 3,000 kids we serve, he's the only one that I personally mentor. And his mother needs options. I pick him up every day to take him to school now. And I pick him up every day afternoon so that we can have a discussion about choices. So our children need to understand that somebody paid a price for them to have the opportunity to go and get an education. And our culture is dumbing down our students to a place where education no longer has value. So we've got to get education down to the transactional level. I have to explain to him that the choices he makes today regarding behavior determine whether or not he is going to learn something today. And he has to learn something if he wants to move out of the environment that he's currently in. So yes, we talk about zip codes, but I think we have to reinforce, those of us who are engaging with work with our students, on individual responsibility for their education and making education a priority. We can't remove one, do one without the other. We can't hold schools accountable and we aren't holding parents accountable. We can't hold parents accountable and we're not holding students accountable. So I would not serve my mentee well if I don't place the burden of his education squarely upon his shoulders, simply to make sure that he didn't let the price that was paid by our forefathers go to waste.
Yeah, thank you. Representative Bryan, similar question, but talk about Teach for America, and that's an example of how government does engage. And so, you went through the program and give us your perspective on government's role in education.
Sure. I think my opening thought when I think about a question like that is, I think education is a public good. You think, well, what do we say? What do we mean when we say something like that? Our Constitution actually says, I'm not going to get it right, but something like religion and morality being necessary, education shall forever be encouraged. I mean, in one of the opening lines of our North Carolina Constitution. And when I think about education as a public good, I think that means traditional public schools, our charter schools, our private schools, homeschooling, all those things. I mean, this is something that's important to the public for our populace to be educated. And I think when I think about both, what does that then look like from the government perspective? I think I want that to be encouraged in a family-centered way and in a way that is meeting the individual student needs. And I think going to my Teach for America experience, it might relate most to the first part of what I said about the public good. I think sometimes we get locked in a box, or we have built up an education system doing everything one way. And all of a sudden we go into an environment where we look at the students we're interacting with and the families, and we would like to do things very differently, but we're stuck in a box. I remember I always, when I look at principals and teachers, I always want to ask this question: are they focusing on the form or on the substance? A lot of times they get the form right. They want to check all the right boxes. I put the objective up on the board. My room looks perfect. And what I want to see, are kids engaged? Are they learning? Are you getting to the substance? I mean, is it, are the families getting engaged? Are the students being engaged? Are we meeting their individual needs? And we have amazing opportunity now when we think about what we can do with technology, how quickly we can get data about where our kids are when they take a test. They can take a test on a computer, and immediately the teacher can get feedback on exactly, areas that they may be missing. So we have unlimited opportunity if we'll allow the freedom that we need, for teachers to teach and principals to be focused on the right things.
So the bottom line, we agree there's a role for government in education. Nobody stood up here and said abolish the Department of Education, the federal Department of Education. So created in the early 70s, the Department of Education is there, and there's a lot of money going into education. So we agree, I believe, that there is a role for government, and the federal government needs to be working with the state and locals. We'll be talking about that. As can Washington springboard upward mobility? And obviously we're focusing on education today. The reason we worded it like that is because Speaker Ryan has 6 task forces that he's announced that are charged with setting the legislative agenda in 2017 for the House under his leadership. Obviously, there's an election that's going on, but he wants to present the vision. And these 6 task forces are charged with establishing the legislative vision. So, Congressman Messer, can you talk specifically about the task force on upward mobility that Speaker Ryan has established, and specifically about education and how you're engaging that task force?
Thank you, Jimmy. Now, first, to your comments right before that, I would say I've read the Constitution, and there's nothing in there about a Department of Education.
I
right?
agree. I agree.
So the reality is that we spend upwards of $30 billion a year as a nation on education. It's about 10%, between 10 and 15% of what we spend nationally. And I think very few of us would say that money should just go away, right? It could be spent better, and we may talk here hopefully through the course of the day of how it could be spent better. The task forces that the Speaker is leading, I think, are important, or frankly important for our caucus. They're important for our country. It's the idea of identifying what are the key areas of public concern and trying to put forward a positive agenda on each of those items. To me, as a kid that grew up in a single-parent family, mother that recently retired from the Delta faucet factory in my hometown, I think this is essentially the essence of the American dream, as we've talked about a couple times here, that any kid, no matter where they come from, can grow up and have an opportunity at success. We called it the Task Force on Upward Mobility because at first there was talks about just being a task force on poverty or other topics. I think it's important to say that we certainly do have problems and challenges of poverty in America today. But I can tell you, when you get out in the middle of America, what a whole lot of Americans are worried about is not falling into poverty. The fact that in the middle of this economy, you've seen about an 84% pay raise in real dollars in 50 years. And in the bottom 80% of wage earners in America over the last 12 years have seen a net decline. And there's no question that education is a key to changing that paradigm. If you look at our economy today, if you're a college-educated young American today, frankly, you have opportunities probably never seen in the history of mankind, right? And if you're not, frankly, it's a very different paradigm. So I think some of that relates to what can we do in K-12. I'd like to see us rethink how we would spend Title I dollars and spend them better, frankly, empower parents. I think we've got to rethink higher education. most of our higher education federal policies were built over a period of decades on one simple principle: access. Under the premise that 30 or 40 years ago, if you had access to a college education, you were better off economically almost right away. One semester at college meant you were going to have better earnings than if you didn't. Today, that's not true. I mean, if you leave college today without a real degree that adds value in the economy, you're not better off. And if you drop out with tens of thousands of dollars in debt, you're much worse off. And so I think we've got to rethink our higher education programs. Not only how do we get more kids to graduation, but what do we do with adults that are transitioning in an economy that they may have 5 careers in their lifetime, let alone different jobs. So I think we've got a lot to rethink. Now, to your specific question about Washington as a springboard, you might not be surprised that I'm skeptical of sort of top-down Washington bureaucratic answers to these questions. I think the real answer is, wherever possible, to take the money that's being spent and put it in the hands of an individual so they can make a decision in their life. I mean, I alluded to it earlier. I did this, forgive me if my statistics aren't entirely correct, because I have to admit, this last bit of research I did on Googling on my phone when I was in the plane coming in, okay? But we spend, I do know, between $300 and $350 billion as a nation in education dollars. I Googled today, I believe the worldwide cell phone market is about $400 billion, okay, to put that in perspective. If you provide private capital access to the kind of market, the $350 billion, the innovation that would follow, right? Anybody remember the old bag phones people used to do with cell phones? Remember we used to have rotary dials, right? I mean, this isn't because of some government intervention. This is because folks, private capital, knew that building a better mousetrap with a phone meant better life. And if we could figure out a way to allow those same great minds to figure out, man, if I could help more kids get where they need to be, there'd be opportunity. I think you'd see all kinds of innovations that we haven't seen so far.
Yeah. Well, and we will be talking about educational innovation later today as well. But Representative Bryan, talk about, with Congressman Messer here, what do the states need? Where's the federal government helping, and where's the federal government hurting? And how can the communication and engagement, especially on these issues around upward mobility through education, what can happen?
Well, I think Congressman Messer's already started some of that process. I got to go up and testify before one of his committees just by asking the questions and starting to communicate, I think is the first step. And I think he raised the first thing when you throw out a question like that I think of is, so many of the dollars that come to us are Title I dollars, and how are we spending them? And one of the things I never fail to be amazed by is, you have the sort of the tail wagging the dog here. You're like, how many compliance officers do we have to put in place? How much money did you give us? Was it actually worth it, or did we just hire, but was it a government jobs program, for compliance officers? Or are we actually helping? Are we doing what are the objectives, that the money is to meet? And maybe, you send a big block grant down and say, these are the objectives, you're going to be measured. And I think you sort of made the metrics point earlier. We've got to have, and we do have, a much better ability to measure how things are doing now. But let's set forth the objectives. Let's say these are what the money's got to be spent on, and you'll be critiqued on it, in X 3-5 year period to see, have you had an impact on all these kids that fall in the Title I? Are they making the educational progress that we were expecting? And if not, then maybe the heavy hand comes down in some other way.
And so, Mr. Mitchell, talk about what has been, what's the most effective change that you've seen in your years in education and in public schools? What have you seen? What change have you seen from the federal government or state and local government that has had a positive impact?
Well, I think the one that's forcing the most collaboration and dialogue is the Every Student Succeeds Act, which allows districts to take, I think, 3% of Title I money and use it for innovative purposes or expand the use of those dollars. I know in our district in Wake County, we're at the table collaborating with them, and we're talking about ways in which we can serve the students that Title I meant to serve, but in innovative, creative ways. If you put so much bureaucracy on the use of the money, then it does not allow for the type of out-of-the-box strategies that we need to identify. I think this time reminds me, there's a book, The Shift Age, that talks about the speed of change in America. This time reminds me of when America shifted from an agricultural society to an industrial society, and the role of the government was to help communicate this needed change. And so the comprehensive high school curriculum was born out of discussions at the national level. And so we made sure that in high schools we had the requisite course offerings to provide that industrial worker. Well, now in this shift age, we need critical thinking skills. So at the top, we need to start measuring critical thinking. We need to reinforce looking at the preparedness of our students earlier on to see if we're able to meet the demands of our workforce. So what we're trying to do is make education relevant in Wake County. I don't want to just talk about getting students to graduate. I need a plan that prepares them to be members of the labor force and that they have the requisite skills necessary in Wake County to fill the jobs that are going to be needed the next 10, 15 years. And so with that, I will say many times in education, we're looking at a point in time. We need to create an environment that pushes for innovation, build upon what works, but have enough adaptive capacity to meet changes. You talked about the cell phone, and I think I actually have a rotary phone at home. But the cell phone, look at the speed of change of cell phones. iPhones come out every year, a new iPhone. By the time I got rid of my flip phone and got a smartphone, it has changed 5 times. Yeah. So if we don't have enough adaptive capacity to keep pace with that rate of change in the school system, something that's innovative today is a dinosaur tomorrow. So we can't be wedded to strategies and processes that can adapt over time.
Can I just add to that I think it's such an astute point that, you know, some folks, I have a sister-in-law who's a 5th grade teacher. I'm a product of public schools that we talked about before. And sometimes you'll talk to folks in the education world that will talk about the good old days. Man, in the good old days, things were different. But when you start talking to them and make the very point you just made, which is, you know, there was a time when what we expected of our schools were if you could produce somebody that could read and write, they had a chance. They'd go build life. They work hard and hustle. They could have a home, have a family, enjoy their life. Today, if you don't graduate a learner, somebody that can learn and relearn through their lifetime, they do not have a chance in this economy, right? And so part of, as we start talking about what we're going to do better as a society, is just that simple acknowledgement that we need more now than we needed 30, 40 years ago in what we produce. Then beyond that, I think as we start looking at what is that we need, we do have to sort of start thinking about how does technology change the world. You know, there's more, hold up my cell phone again, there's more information on this cell phone than there was in a library where I grew up. A lot of these big institutions we build, I mean, I still like books. Books are great, right? But what we needed then is different now. The whole kind of complex of high stakes testing. You know, in a world where the only way you could really evaluate a kid was to pass a test, or take a test that then took 2 months to grade and get back the results. Today, a teacher can go student to student to student in the classroom and know in real time what they know and don't know, right? And so rethinking those things is, I think, an important part of us getting to the next level where we need to go.
Just real quick, the Every Student Succeeds Act, what's the history of that?
So that is, you know, there is few things that bring Washington together like trying to repeal No Child Left Behind, right? So it was a bill that started with the best of intentions, this idea that we should have no child in America that doesn't have access to better opportunities, included metrics which were important for schools and teachers. Unfortunately, it became a very sort of top-down driven metric. The ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, is essentially the replacement for No Child Left Behind, has a series of innovations in it. Among them is making sure that those metrics in place for schools and for teachers are driven locally and at the state level, not the federal level anymore.
So one of the things that drives my wife and I crazy in education, and partly because when we were going to school in the 80s, we didn't receive it. We don't have financial literacy training in our schools, and we don't have civics education taught well in our schools. And you know, talking about No Child Left Behind and ESSA, obviously testing is a huge issue. And if that's a measure of what you deem important, do we start considering testing on financial literacy? And where does that come from? We want it to come from the bottom up, but that bothers me. How do we engage an issue like inserting financial literacy and civics education? Because this election shows us, when we were talking about contested conventions, open conventions, it shows you that people, oh, it should just be democratic, whoever gets the most votes, when that's not the way our republic is set up, nor are the political parties. So it seems to me that those are two critical things.
A couple other thoughts, open up to other guys too. Yeah. We also don't have basic dietary education. And when I was a kid, we had physical education that was more common in schools too. And a lot of that got pushed out by many of the mandates as well. I guess my answer to that is, while I think all of those are good ideas, I'm not sure that a federal government top-down mandate of those things is the right answer, because I think often when that happens, there tend to be a world of unintended consequences. The best way to see much of what you're talking about, I think, is to free up the local communities to determine what's best for their kids.
I'll make a comment on that. We've been working on a little financial literacy bill ourselves, and it was sort of, I think, out of the same thought, gosh, a lot of kids, and maybe particularly kids who have grown up in poverty, are not prepared for just, bank account, a lot of common things that they need to be thinking about as they, head off to college. And we've had a lot of banks, got a lot of banks, around the state, who have had an interest in saying, hey, we want to help, we want to participate. And so we've been working to partner to make sure teachers are then actually trained well and can sort of partner with businesses in the community to make sure, kids are getting that. And I think we'll probably do it like many things. You sort of if you have some engaged folks who you can pilot with and see how it's working, and then if it's working well, you can expand it.
But I think you're talking about not only survival skills, but you're talking about reinforcing the foundation of what makes America great. So what I'm concerned about when I work with the kids that I work with, if you come out of 3 and 4 generations of poverty, and nobody has any financial literacy, that cycle is just going to repeat itself. Right. So you don't have folks that are able to capitalize on their entrepreneurial gifts or their academic prowess, because you don't have the requisite financial skills to harvest it. So then the tax base suffers, because those who could be entrepreneurs contributing to the tax base are the beneficiaries of the taxes. So in order for us as a nation to move from being a debtor nation, we've got to realize that we need to invest in financial literacy to make sure that our children understand how to manage money, how to make money. See, you can't even introduce entrepreneurship if you don't know how to balance a checkbook. Mm-hmm. So you got to be able to give kids the opportunity to make it serious as other core subjects. Financial literacy has to be, if we're ever going to grow out of the mentality of being a debtor nation. Culturally speaking, it's always I'll spend now and pay it later. And you don't know where the later is coming from. You don't know when you have to pay the bill. So we've got to change that dynamic. Now, again, I don't think the federal government solves everything, but the federal government can help create the dialogue and the discussion. How about companies that are exporting jobs overseas? How about us figuring out a way to give them incentives to come back in our urban areas and then teach the students who are there and the people in the community, along with job opportunities, a way to be a subcontractor? And what does it mean to be a subcontractor? I had a meeting with one of the largest retailers in the area, and when we were sitting down talking, they wanted to give me money for a backpack program. I said, I don't want a backpack program. I don't want that. What I want you to do is tell me how many of your kids who are hourly wage employees are rising to management ranks. Tell me what your attrition problems are. And they said to me that the reason why there's so much turnover is because students don't have, or the kids they have didn't get a value of the stock options. I said, you know why? Because they don't value money. They value consumerism. So if what we can do is partner, if we can put them in leadership programs to understand it's not about the hourly wage, it is about your net assets. If we can teach them that, then we can turn a management class over for you. One child that rises in a retail location like that, getting to a $50,000 a job year, can move his entire family out of poverty. So that's the discussion we need to have, and stop leaving the people that are marginalized in the nation out of the discussions if they can't be a part of the solution.
And by the way, Jimmy, I would just add, if you haven't seen an article, it was in Atlantic Monthly this month, that talked about the fact that 50% of America could not access $400 if they were in a financial crisis. I mean, this is far more than just folks that are coming through poverty, which is obviously a major challenge. I mean, I think we've got an epidemic in our country on that topic.
Well, so, Mr. Mitchell, you talked about it at the beginning, and you all were just talking about it now as well. The bottom line is we've got to attract great mentors at communities and schools. We've got to attract great teachers. And when we're talking about the most at-risk students, whose challenges really, in large part, result from not having parents in the home reading to them and engaging their brain and developing vocabulary, if we all agree that that's one of the biggest differences between wealthy families and families that don't have money, obviously that raises the importance of incredible people who can overcome a lot of these challenges that get ingrained, and they're not insurmountable, right? We've seen that these problems can be surmounted, but it does take incredible mentors with patience and teachers who go above and beyond. And so when we're talking about upward mobility, if we all agree that it takes these extraordinary people, what are the most innovative, incentive-based ways to attract the right people into these most challenging schools? Teach for America, obviously that's part of, that was part of its mission. But, you know, talk about Teach America, talk for other programs, and what are the best ideas out there to accomplish that goal?
I think you have to value the contribution. One of the things that I struggle with, my mother was a principal, all of my aunts and uncles were educators. And I think teachers get a bad rap.
Yes.
I think they really do.
Sure.
Because what people don't understand is how much time they put into their profession. And they're not paid when they're at home grading papers up until 1 o'clock in the morning, as my wife was last night. Right. By the way, it's Mother's Day. That was a plug in case she sees that. I acknowledge her job well done. So I think we have to figure out a way where we are serious about investing in the people that spend the most time with our children from the time that they are pre-K to the time that they graduate from college. We as a nation have got to figure out a way to invest in our educators. Now, once you make the investment, then I believe in competition. I believe if you create a professional class of teachers, they are already professional, but let's pay them like that. And if we pay them like that, you draw the best and brightest. Now, I can speak about a time, and it's very, we don't speak about these things, but in the not too distant past, people who did not have access to every profession flocked to education because that was the best way they could make a change and a difference for future generations. So you had your best and brightest minds that were in the classroom. And I haven't done any longitudinal study, but I think if you take a look at it, when we have had the best and brightest minds in education, we've also produced the best leadership classes in America, people who've gone into industry, people who have come up with revolutionary ideas. And again, I kind of go back to what I started at the beginning, that programs don't change students, relationships do. And so I think it's all circled around or embodied by the spirit of servant leadership. Teachers are the ones who are going to influence our students. And servant leadership model is whenever you have the opportunity to influence somebody else, so you do it for your benefit or for their benefit. So we can find teachers are called. If you can find people called according to purpose, pay them well, affirm them, get off of their back, support them, and give them an opportunity to earn a professional wage, then let's make it competitive. Let's make sure that we don't just get people who just want to teach those kids. Let's get the best minds to teach our kids and make a commitment, industry, government, at the national, state, and local levels to harvest that potential teacher.
Rob?
Yeah, I mean, I might just ask the question, do we have a 21st century model for how we do that? I think we built up an education system. We always joke in North Carolina, we had 36 steps. You move up one step a year, next step. And there's reasons it was built up that way. You had, my mom's a teacher. A lot of women that graduated from college went into teaching. They wanted a safe, stable, income. We're fine with X% increase a year. They loved what they did. To your point, they felt called to do it. But when you look at the 21st century and what a professional environment ought to look like for teachers, and frankly, there were other professions that sort of worked a little bit like that. They're not working like that today, and we're still stuck in a lot of school systems that are still working off that. And that's why I love, looking at charters. And I think when you look at a place like New Orleans, which they had actually started their recovery school district before Hurricane Katrina came through, but if you get the chance to press the redo button on how you set up your schools and how you pay your teachers and how you treat them professionally, you don't do it in the way most of the states are built right now. And so, I hope, I think one of the things that's hard for states, because we deal with a budget every year where we can't have debt. I said we got to pay the bills every year, and to transition, even businesses, they can often, go take a loan, take some transition period to move off a salary schedule. I think if some of the money coming was helping with the innovative things that moved us to the 21st century, and the state's got to be critiqued on their ability to do that well in order to to get those monies, but I think it'd be a great help in moving us in the right direction.
So a couple big picture thoughts and then a couple smaller picture thoughts. Big picture level is, as others have mentioned, American military today looks a lot different than it did 50 years ago in the era of the Cold War. The day we're fighting the Taliban, we got to have a different structure than we had. The technology companies today look different than IBM did. Those that don't went away. Churches today, community churches today, are structured differently than the churches of 50 years ago. Many of them that aren't changing are struggling with that. Moses didn't come down with the tablets and create our current structure, and I think we need to rethink what that means. There are other countries, for example, it's my understanding, I'll have to admit I've never seen these teachers, but it's my understanding in South Korea, you have teachers make $1 million a year, right? Basically being outstanding instructors, and thousands of kids tune in, pay a little to be able to, they're like the Britney Spears, or that's an old reference. She's not even cool anymore.
Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift, yeah. My daughters are 12 and 11, so I got to get up with this stuff. But, of education. And I do think what I know about the teachers I talk to is, contrary to some of the rhetoric, great teachers want to teach the kids that are hard to reach, right? They want to make a difference. And if we could align the financial incentives with the opportunity to do that, there is no end to the talent, I think, that we could draw to this field, because it is a calling, and it is a place where every day you can see that you're making a difference in a way that isn't true many other places in life.
Yeah. Well, this conversation is going to continue. We want you all who are here with us, we're going to keep on plowing through. Feel free to get up and get something to drink or use the restroom. I want to wrap it up by just thinking about football for a moment. I know it's a shock, but I kind of study football teams and coaching and think about leadership through the lens of football. I've played for some good coaches and bad coaches. We've all had good teachers and bad teachers. It's interesting. If we want excellence, if you look at, you may not like the New England Patriots, but Coach Bill Belichick has set up an operation where he demands excellence. He's matter of fact. He knows how to engage his audience, and it strikes me that we have got to, I agree, revamp our education system, especially the training system. And Belichick questioned the way that things were always done. That's how he established their program, and he's really interesting on pay. I'm not saying that we align just like the Patriots do, but Tom Brady doesn't make as much as he could on the open market. There is a recognition that it's a team. Now, teachers, they sacrifice. They don't need to know about that. They sacrifice for the team. But their pay for performance, South Korea, $1 million. If this is free enterprise, and if we believe in free enterprise and in free markets, and that humans respond to incentives, and if we want teachers to inspire young people and figure out what their buttons are and what their skills are, then we've got to revamp our 21st century education system. And Congressman Messer, you've got to get on that task force and get them thinking about how to unleash innovation and creativity. And that's what the next panel is going to be talking about. I want to thank each of you for your thoughts and the benefits of having you here. And most of all, I want to thank you for your service to the nation and being a part of the cause best described by the Declaration of Independence.
Thank you, Jimmy. As a Colts fan, it was hard for me to hear that
sorry.
Patriots comparison, but I do agree with your underlying idea.
Thank you again, everybody. Why don't you give everyone applause? Jimmy Kemp, Congressman Messer, Travis Mitchell, Rob Bryan.